Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Kirk Hall. I'm the Transition Program Administrator with Vocational Rehabilitation. Just for your awareness, this session is being recorded and will be archived and made available for those who were not able to participate during this time, or for those who may have to leave early or come in late. This provider update is in regards to pre-employment transition services for youth under the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. It's going to cover many of the services that we are putting or have put in place to be able to deliver services and meet requirements under that Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, or WIOA for short. As we'll be referencing it throughout, we will be describing it as WIOA for those of you there. If you have any questions, please make sure that you enter them into the chat box. We will not be taking questions over the phone in this session. We do want to make sure that at the end of the session we have the opportunity to answer as many questions as possible in the time allotted. If we are not able to answer everyone's questions, then we will be sending out that information to all the attendees after the presentation. So we will be answering those questions in one form or another. And why don't we go ahead then and move forward. Again, thank you all for participating, and hopefully you will find this information informative. Well, good afternoon, everybody. The Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, or WIOA as we call it, requires that 15% of the federal allocation to vocational rehabilitation be set aside for we do play sometimes, but pre-employment transition services to students. So these are individuals who are in high school at the time these services would be delivered. 50% of the supported employment funds that we receive must be for transition-age youth. Now, this group are not necessarily youth that are in high school. So there is some difference in what WIOA requires for different populations of youth. 75% of workforce funds for transition-age youth need to be applied to those youth who are out of school. So what we see happening is that WIOA is aligning services so that the programs begin to complement each other as opposed to having overlap with regards to the services being provided to youth. We do see throughout WIOA an emphasis on STEM, STEM being science, technology, engineering, and math, and the exploration of those occupations that we know to be in demand across the nation, and especially in Florida. So what does this mean for vocational rehabilitation? It means in order for us to be able to meet the WIOA funding requirements for transition students, we really need to be taking applications and developing the individual plan for employment 2 years before the student will be exiting high school. So we will be taking those applications and making referrals to providers while individuals are still in high school in order to deliver these youth services. Specific VR services are going to be consistently provided to students while in high school. And these are going to be the services that have been identified as evidence-based in helping people to secure employment and making successful transition through high school and into post-secondary education, training, or employment. We'll be expanding the use of our effective transition programs and services as well, so that we know that there's something through evidence and our own outcomes that works. We'll be looking to expand those successful programs. Here's a snapshot with regard to transition age youth, age 16 to 21 in each of the areas, so you can get an idea of how many youth potentially would be receiving these services under WIOA. Now, a small portion of these individuals will be youth who have exited the school system, but the vast majority are actually youth who are in high school at the time. And we see across the state we have 14,000 plus students that will be looking to provide services for, and just explaining a little bit more about what those services would be. So pre-employment transition services under WIOA It describes the need for career counseling and exploration, workplace readiness training, so making sure that people have the skills they need in order to pursue seeking employment, community-based work experiences, those actual experiences that are necessary to have an idea of what work is all about. So many times our thoughts, our perceptions about what work is are defined for us by what we see in media or what other individuals who don't work in the field tell us. It can lead to some unrealistic expectations in some cases. We want to make sure that people have experiences so that they can really fully engage in selecting appropriate career paths and those career paths that are going to lead to those successful outcomes that we know everyone is capable of achieving. Self-advocacy, instruction, and peer mentoring, post-secondary education and counseling, so all of those things that are going to take place after high school, the training, the education, and employment. Things that aren't included in services under WIOA are where we in vocational rehabilitation have spent the majority of our funds on youth in the past, which is post-secondary education and training. We spend quite a bit of our funding on helping youth to obtain the skills that will help them become employed, either through career and technical, apprenticeships, sometimes associate programs or college degrees, certificate programs, bachelor's degrees, and it really is very much individualized based on the person's unique abilities and what they can, how they can best pursue that career. Placement services and supported employment services, so also the placement services that tend to go hand in hand. We spend quite a bit, as you are well aware, on those services. So those are things that we can't count towards meeting the 15% set aside under WIOA. Current VR services which meet WIOA requirements that will count towards meeting the funding requirement are things like career counseling, where we have aptitude and interest assessments, comprehensive and situational evaluations, discovery. Many of you out there may be discovery providers or not, may be pursuing that effort to become discovery providers. So both services under discovery, both 1 and 2. Supported employment individual career plans are also countable. Workplace readiness training. So many of you in the past may have provided pre-employment training. This would be in preparation of those placement services. For youth, we've looked at it a little bit differently in that we're actually preparing to engage in work experiences through pre-employment training. But we'll talk more about that in just a few moments. On community-based work experiences, which include things like on-the-job training services, or OJT, community-based work experiences through some of our programs like the third-party cooperative arrangements and job coaching. All of these services are examples of delivery of a work experience to help people be better prepared to select and pursue a career path. Core services and supports for transition students. And we have an expectation that unless the student is unable to participate, and there should be a good reason why not, that we make available things like career assessment and counseling, pre-placement training, and the opportunity to participate in work experiences. And those work experiences could take the form of OJT or job coaching. And we see this as being a deliverable for all of our youth who are in high school, not just those who have a specific need in a certain career area or field. And it's really about helping them to establish the work behaviors, the peer interactions that they'll need, not just to obtain employment, but to be able to maintain employment as they transition out of high school into training and or career paths. Intensive services and supports for transition students. We know that we have many things in place to help support those who need additional supports to be effective, and especially those individuals who may need ongoing supports in order to maintain employment. We want to make sure that they have access to discovery services if they should need those, assistance through our third-party cooperative arrangements, project search. Sorry, we got a little feedback there. Hopefully you all survived that. Job coaching over the summer. We're getting a lot of feedback. Job coaching over the summer and post-secondary education programs are examples of some of the services where individuals might need more intense services and support than, say, others of their peers. And these are going to be students who might require additional time to acquire appropriate work behaviors, who may need some repetition of the activities to learn those essential skills, need to build endurance to be able to actually even engage in work. We know that many of our youth simply haven't been given the opportunity to develop that capacity or that endurance to engage in work activities. So these are all things that we would hope to accomplish through these intensive services that are being conducted while they're in school. Oftentimes it's not the work skills or those services, it's identifying the right work environment and any additional supports where individuals can do their best. So those are the things that we hope to accomplish through that intensive service piece for those students who have the most significant disabilities and need the additional supports. Ideally, we would look at the summer months to deliver some of these services, such as pre-placement training. But it essentially is going to be taking place when school is not in session. That does mean that we can also consider the hours after school and the weekends, although for the most part we expect that the summer months would be the most conducive to being able to deliver services like the pre-placement training. It's a service that can be done prior to or in conjunction with OJT, that work experience component. We know that our support services are going to be provided in order for them to participate. So if, for instance, a person needs assistance to get back and forth to the pre-placement training, that is something that VR can assist with. Assistive services are devices to be able to participate. Again, that's something that we want to make sure people have access to in order to take advantage and being able to benefit from these services that will be offered. Pre-placement training contract updates. In the past, we had in contract that individuals participating in the training were required to complete 40 hours. What we found was that not everybody needed 40 hours of pre-placement training. We saw that there were opportunities for individuals to be able to benefit for a much shorter duration and make sure also that they had the opportunity to complete those hours so that providers could be reimbursed for their efforts. So we've reduced the minimum number of hours to 20, and we'll be talking a little bit about the curriculum involved with that. And 20 more hours can be provided if needed, and that would be through the approval process and speaking with the counselor and the need for those additional hours and their ability to benefit from those services that would be provided. Required documentation for that training requires that a survey be completed as well as a report. The referral may be independent of other placement services. Previously in contract, we had that in order to make a referral for pre-placement training, it also had to coincide with a referral for placement services. So obviously individuals that we're discussing here are youth that are in high school, so we're not looking to place individuals in employment as their vocational goal. This is really about exposure to various fields of work and an opportunity for them to develop the necessary work behaviors that are going to help them to keep the jobs that they do secure in the future. Training has to be structured, formal, and interactive. If it goes over 4 hours, then the 30-minute lunch break is required for any training that extends beyond that period. So part of the required curriculum, it'll need to include both lecture and hands-on activities. We know that there has been some interest from various providers in doing entirely an online version or a virtual version of a curriculum. Now, while you can have a virtual component, and actually some of the curriculum lends itself to that, there does need to be some face-to-face representation in order to be able to interact appropriately with the customer and ensure that they are engaged and involved. Some of the curriculum would include things like resume writing and development. We know that for most youth, we're really looking at those functional resumes where we're emphasizing their skills and abilities simply because they haven't had the opportunity to acquire a work history that you might see in other types of situations. Finding and completing job applications online. Pretty much anything these days is online. And there's a definitive process to going about and being able to complete an application or post a resume online that is very different than the old paper process and snail mail delivery route that we may have taken in years past. Interviewing skills and making employer contacts. One of those key pieces, to the extent that individuals can benefit from interviewing skills, it really does help them then with some of those personal interactions. Some of the things that help a person to do well in interviewing are the same things that will help them to be successful socially when they're engaged in those work activities. Personal interactions and handling of conflict. We want to make sure that people know how to handle those situations when things aren't going their way or they feel that they're put in a position where rather than taking something as constructive criticism, they may become defensive. How do you handle that in an appropriate manner? You want to work appropriately with your coworkers, certainly your employer, but in many situations, the most important individuals would be those other customers in a business or similar setting. Being able to navigate the community, getting around, finding your way. If you have difficulty getting back and forth, you may be looking for employment that is closer to home simply to minimize the impact of it. So making those important decisions about how to get around and what your resources are and what's available plays a big part in preparing for employment. When we're talking about the distinction between those pre-placement training and placement services, the likelihood is that if placement services are to be authorized for these individuals, they would be done after they're exiting high school and potentially after they're finishing a training program. So we are looking at that as much further down in that process. The individualized curriculum, we talked about some things that would be common components to a curriculum, but there does need to be some built-in flexibility. So curriculum should allow time for individual topics based on customer need to be addressed. These are topics that would be identified through the VR referral process, discussion with the customer, and other systems of support that are working with the customer or supporting them in some way. So a lot of those partner agencies or other individuals, even the school system in this case, which is a huge support system for individuals, all of them will provide good information, tell where people do well, but also where they may need some assistance. Some examples of some additional things that some individuals may need help with, but not others, would be things like grooming, punctuality, attendance, all of those critical soft skills or social skills which we know cause people to lose positions that they could otherwise do or perform. Things such as dealing with payroll deductions. Many individuals are going to be experiencing work for the first time, may not quite understand what it means to get it paid and then have things deducted from that pay. Insurance benefits. Selecting occupations that have benefits is a critical need for young people, especially. Having a job that may pay a little more but doesn't provide benefits, what's the relative value? And being able to understand and make sound decisions about those things. Safety, those are all kinds of things that could be, but the idea is that everyone will have some individualized needs, and there should be enough time built in so that those can be addressed as part of that process. Training considerations. Providers will want to work closely with the local VR offices to identify the number of students who will need training. And again, WIOA requires that we expend 15% of our total allocation. So all of the money that the feds provide to vocational rehabilitation, 15% of that will be set aside for those WIOA services, which include pre-placement training and OJT work experiences. So we have the funding for those services, and it's really identifying then what are the number, how many students would actually be available, and then the providers who are going to be conducting that training. Because each one of those providers, of course, would be an option for customers to select. So how many other providers are delivering a similar service in your area? And then the customer's availability during specific times. Do you have some that are available at the beginning of summer, some available at the end of summer, some morning, some afternoon? It can vary. Training logistics. Many providers have facilities that they would be able to utilize for a training course. And for those that are set and ready, having separate morning and afternoon courses would be an excellent way to handle that, especially given the minimum of being 20 hours. That works very well if you have a week course of 5 days, 4 hours. But if you have someone that misses an hour, having an afternoon course where they can pick up an hour will help mitigate having them carry over into a following week. And the same thing for the afternoon course, having that availability for a person to come in early. Just in those situations where that day is extended, remember to account for that 30-minute lunch break that's required. Partnering with local community college, if there aren't facilities available as a provider, or you don't have access to those readily, oftentimes your community college, through community education programs, will have facilities where you can negotiate a flat rate in order to deliver services that are going to be of benefit to the community. And these certainly fall into that category. So having discussions with those local resources. And there's any other number of ways that you can go about securing facilities, but that's something certainly that you'll want to consider as you're looking to provide training to a group of individuals. Delivering multiple pre-placement training courses over the summer months. Again, not putting your eggs all in one basket at one time is something that I encourage everybody to do. And of course, the more classes we offer, potentially the more individuals you'll be able to serve as a provider. We have, I want to say, reimbursement for 40 hours of pre-placement training would be at $604. So if you had a 20-hour course, that would be $302. So if you have a provider delivering to 10 students, that quickly comes down to $3,000 for that week of 20-hour training for that trainer. And, well, for the provider, let's not say the trainer. We know that all of the providers have bills to pay, and that goes into the calculations of how the individual trainers would be reimbursed. But that's just an example to give you an idea of dollar figures, and of course using the 10 is an easy way to see, where the value is in being able to deliver things like pre-placement training. Some of provider specifics, employment service providers. Those providers can be delivering training to youth with a regular IPE. Referral and authorization are generated in REBA in the same manner that's currently used. We've spent the last several months developing youth coding so that we can track and account for the dollars spent and make sure that it's applied to the set-aside fund that we've established for WIOA. And what we've done is made sure that there's been minimal impact to our own staff as well as providers in having to have that process in place. So it follows very much the same process. There are certain allowances made for those pre-employment youth, and they're emphasized more so in the OJT than they are in the pre-placement training. But we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a few moments. Supported employment providers will be looking to them to provide training to youth with a supported employment IPE. Referral and authorization will be generated through RIMS. Right now, the contract that we have in place does not allow for pre-placement training under the supported employment piece. But this is something that will be updated in the next revision of the contract. And in the interim, we do have coding available through RIMS simply because it was set up in RIMS before we moved to the REBA system. For those of you who may not be familiar, REBA is our Rehabilitation Electronic Billing Process, or application rather, and RIMS is our Rehabilitation Information Management System. The two of those work collectively to help us keep services and funding organized for all of our customers. So moving from pre-placement training, we all see how that can benefit individuals, but it doesn't help if they don't have access to work experiences in order to be able to practice those things they've just acquired through training. On-the-job training for youth who are in high school does not have to align specifically with the vocational goal listed on the IPE. The real goal is development of those work behaviors and having exposure to work experiences so they have an idea of what work does require, regardless of the actual place or environment that it's in. It may be done in conjunction with pre-placement training, so you may have an individual who's participating in an OJT in the evening hours and somebody who would be going through, say, a class in the morning hours. It is possible, and there are some programs out there who may be doing classes over a period of 2 weeks and alternate days and then have their providers work with them in an OJT alternating those days. So they're getting the education piece and they're practicing skills at the same time. Ideally, we'd like to see the training in place as they move into OJT, but there can be a benefit for some individuals in being able to do both simultaneously so that as things arise on the job, they can be addressed through the pre-placement training. Support services will be provided when needed to participate in the same way that we would support services that are needed to do pre-placement training. We would do the same thing to participate in the OJT. So if they need transportation assistance in order to get to that work site, we would definitely be supporting that, or that training site rather. Assistive services or devices in order to be able to participate. Again, those are things that we'll be doing. I know that many agencies and organizations are waiting for rule to come out in order to really define their process. While rule will certainly be helpful in helping us to identify some additional things that can be done or additional ways that we can have services or supports counted, it really will not take away from the major pieces that have been outlined under WIOA so far. So we know that the work readiness training or the pre-placement training as a provider that you're familiar with, we know that the OJT or the work experiences are things that will continue to be a part of that WIOA process. So there is no reason for us to wait on rule for that. A benefit would be information that comes out that allows us to also count things like transportation and assistive services for people to participate in those services, if those could be counted towards our meeting that requirement. But the one would not take away from those core things that are expected under WIOA. WIOA, it's almost a little chant, isn't it? It's like WIOA, WIOA, so off to work we go. OJT for youth. Again, we're looking at it taking place when school is not in session. We're not trying to supplant any of the services that are being provided through the school systems. So that is why these are activities that aren't taking place while school is in session. So again, your evening hours, your weekend hours. But again, we expect that most often we'll see these provided to youth in high school over the summer months. We use it to develop those needed work behaviors. It's not required to be used as training for a specific job. So again, you don't have to have that vocational goal aligned with the OJT opportunity that's provided. The OJT may be paid or unpaid experiences, and they can be used to explore specific work settings, as well as obtain exposure to various career fields. So not only do you get to see it, but sometimes it helps to be in even within the same field of work, multiple settings. The more exposure, the more practice individuals can get in those OJTs or in those experiences, the better off they'll be as they transition from high school to post-secondary training, education, and/or employment. Again, we have these for customers with a regular or supported employment, individual plan for employment. So any type of plan that you have, we can certainly help to support that with an OJT over those summer months or when school is out of session. Contract updates for OJT. And these are some exceptions for youth who are in high school. And they include, that there isn't a requirement that employment services referral occur at the same time as the OJT. Oftentimes, you'll see that, especially for adult services, if we're providing a training in a specific field of work, then we would certainly expect that the next step as part of that process would be placement of the individual in that occupation. But for youth, we're really about delivering the work experience and developing those work behaviors. So we don't have to have that tied to the vocational goal, and we don't expect, of course, while they're in high school, that they'll be pursuing those placement services. Providers may serve as the employer of record and sign as the employer on VR forms. This should substantially lessen the load, where in the past for OJT, we've had employers have to become VR providers in order to participate in the OJT, which was a huge burden, if you will, on the providers to try and get employers to go through that process of becoming a VR vendor. So in this situation, it's not required, and the employer of record, which is the provider, is able then to sign on all of the VR forms as the employer. The worksite or business representative is not required to complete any of the VR forms. Again, that should alleviate some of the issues that are faced. If there are any requirements that have to be met in order to participate in that, that is the responsibility of the provider to ensure that those pieces are met. For instance, liability, insurance coverage, those things that an employer would normally be responsible for. The provider assumes responsibility for those issues. Wage reimbursement is not required. Again, with the OJT process, we were requiring that there be wage reimbursement as part of that. With this youth component, wage reimbursement is not required. So it should make for a much easier process. Anywhere that we were able to make things easier for the provider to go out and work with employers and be able to deliver students multiple experiences across the community, we've done within that contracting piece as well as our process. Services for the future. We're looking at services such as peer mentoring. We think that there's a great potential for youth-led career exploration, community engagement. So many times employment hinges upon the network of supports that's developed within a community. This is something that we will be spending some additional time in exploring how that can be provided as a discrete VR service in the same way that we've done with things like discovery. Customized employment, speaking of discovery, we're looking at provision of that as a service. And again, discovery, for those of you who are familiar, is a component of customized employment. The customized piece, of course, coming further down the line. We are looking how this will be able to supplement the array of available services, especially those delivered to individuals who need ongoing support in order to obtain or maintain employment. Those are the major pieces of change that we've gone through. Again, we spent the last several months updating our systems so that youth coding is in place so that we can track provision of these services. That is ready to roll out in our system. We fully expect that providers will want to engage in these services beginning early summer, if not before then. And anything that you have in the way of questions or need to have concerns addressed, you can feel confident in contacting us and receiving that additional information. So I want to thank everybody for participating. What we'll do now is start answering some questions regarding the provider update, especially with regard to pre-placement training and OJT or work experiences. If for some reason you don't want to type in your question here, you can always contact us by phone. If you need to call toll-free, that line is there, as well as my direct line. You can also email me if you want to spend a little time composing your thoughts and having questions answered that way. Let me go ahead and start to answer some of the questions that have been posed. Can pre-employment services be done in group setting? If so, what is the max? In any setting, and yes, it can be done in a group setting, we fully expect there to be a classroom environment for the pre-placement training. But in any setting, it has to be of a limited number so that you can provide the individual component as required under a contract. So when you're looking at maxes, a good rule of thumb is somewhere between 10 to 12 individuals per trainer. Now, of course, if you add staff, you can increase the size. If you have concerns that you feel you can deliver more effectively in a larger setting and have some other supports provided, please feel free to contact us and we'll be happy to discuss that scenario with you. Is pre-placement training individualized or can be conducted in a group? Okay, sorry, I'm just reading through these one by one. How many participants are allowed, which is the same question as the one previously. Again, you still have to be able to deliver the required curriculum, which obviously you could do that probably to as many individuals. One of the things that you're going to want to do as a provider is deliver the required pieces, but also be able to gauge an individual's performance in that. And that especially if you think that individuals need additional time. And a lot of the individual support may mean that some additional hours would be needed if they can't be fully met within that 20 hours that's allowed initially. Question number 3, will a provider and participant be able to do more than one OJT? Yes. We fully expect that there would be multiple work experiences provided to individuals, and it really does take individual, especially somebody with a complex set of disabilities, or most significant disabilities, especially of cognitive nature, at least 3 good work experiences before they really have a concept of what work is about, what it involves. So ideally, we would like to see everybody receive multiple. We want to make sure that everybody gets at least 1. So, but to answer your question, yes, more than 1 OJT is allowed. That doesn't mean we want them to be short OJTs. We want them to be involved and engaged so that they do get the benefit from that work experience. Please clarify the statement that wage reimbursement is not required. What does this mean? Under the OJT, if you were working with someone who is not a youth in high school, the provider would be required to deliver wage reimbursement as part of that. So they would have to provide wages. Unpaid work experience is allowed to this, whereas it was not under the previous OJT.
Starting at 2:41 p.m. in Richmond.
So, and we'll go through. Please make sure if you have questions that haven't been answered. I know sometimes we have similar questions. Any of those? Let me go here. All right. And what I'm doing is I'm just going through and making sure that I'm answering all the questions that we can while we have you all on the line. For those of you who've had your questions answered, I want to thank you for participating. Again, any questions we do have, we'll be getting back with individuals in case you need to leave earlier in the process. This webinar is being archived and will be available for individuals who were not able to participate, and for those who did. The reimbursement rates for the services are the same as are already provided under the service. So pre-placement training, as I had already mentioned, was the $604 for 40 hours, or $302 for a 20-hour version. Essentially, $302 for every 20 hours that a person participates in. OJT services for the plan and agreement, the benchmark for that is $980. The final report, $653. So you have both of those benchmarks that would be available under the OJT. All right. And let's see what other questions we have. How soon will this process start with providing services to youths? I sound almost like a New Yorker there. Youths. The youths of Florida will soon be able to receive these services. The coding for us to be able to track the services should roll out later this week, which will then allow us to make referrals for the services. We expect all of our services, as I mentioned previously, to be in place and ready to go as soon as providers are able to deliver those services. Again, ideally for these, because we're talking about youth who are in high school, the summer months would be preferable, simply based on availability of young individuals. But it's anytime really that school is not in session that would be available. Okay, and people have asked for a copy of the PowerPoint presentation. It will be available to everyone as soon as we can get it posted. If you need a copy sooner for some reason, please contact Carmen DuPoint. She was listed on your registration paperwork, the flyer that was sent out. Can multiple OJTs be done at the same location? If we're talking location, if we're talking about different experiences, then it is possible to do that. What we don't want to see is that an individual is just provided the same location simply because that's the easiest course. Different settings, different locations are what's going to benefit the individual the most, and so that is the initial expectation. But if there's a wide variety of experiences that they can engage in a single setting, then it is possible to do that. We would expect it to be considerably different if you're initiating those OJTs in one place. And again, we're talking about community employment, community-based work experiences. So we're really looking at those that are out in the community so that other issues can be addressed as well. Things like how do you coordinate those services that you need in order to become employed, such as transportation and getting around. What is it you need to do this job in particular at this site that you may not need for other environmental considerations, accessibility of the business that you're going at. All of those things that may be barriers in different situations, in different settings, we want people to have an opportunity to experience those. Let me scroll down. Does an agency have to be an EN to be able to be paid for the training? They don't have to be an employment network, but they do have to be a VR provider. So they'll have to be entered into My Florida Marketplace as well as become a VR provider. If you go to our website, rehabworks.org, you'll find the VR vendor process located in the left-hand column, and that'll tell you how you can go about becoming a VR vendor, VR provider. Are you suggesting that we should let our local VR offices know directly that we are prepared to work with you specifically through pre-employment training and OJT? How does job coaching look in a referral as opposed to supported employment? Okay. When you're talking about things like job coaching as opposed to supported employment covers many of those pieces, whereas the job coaching is more about the individual instruction in a job, a situation that's already been set up, established. Typically, job coaching is provided on an hourly basis so that individuals can practice and receive hands-on instruction on delivering a specific set of skills required for a particular job. In most cases, what we'll see this provided, the job coaching component will be where a school has maybe set up an individual in a work experience while they're in school during that school year. And of course, as summer rolls around, school lets out, that work experience thing goes away for that individual. We're able to sustain the work experience through things like job coaching or be able then to capture it through an OJT. Supported employment, which is actually the adult portion of it, the placement services part, wouldn't be provided to that individual until they were exiting high school. The first part of the question was, are you suggesting we should let our local offices know directly we're prepared to work? What I'm saying is that you want to coordinate with your local office the same way you currently do for placement services or support, and getting a feel for them as to who they have available number-wise for that, because it's going to vary from location to location, but there are many, many youth who will need these services. So what does that look like for your local area as opposed to that? On our end, we are letting our staff know, both at the local area and through state meetings, that they need to be making these referrals for services as part of their planning process, so that providers are well aware of what would be necessary in order to be able to provide and deliver the service. On your end, it always helps to have that communication with your local staff to see where they are in their part of that process, especially as you're attempting to plan for delivery of services and knowing what you can expect. How do we set up peer mentoring considering confidentiality issues? Peer mentoring established as a service will have specific guidelines and rules where the peer mentor would be a employee of a provider. Again, this is a service we're exploring, so once we have a service like that in place, we'll certainly be providing information and training on that service. All right. Will reimbursement for OJT and pre-placement training be the same as current rates? Yes. Does the curriculum need to be approved by Tallahassee? The curriculum will need to follow the contract, and that includes both the components that I mentioned that were required under contract, as well as the individual components, which are delivered through that referral process, discussions with the customers and other entities that are supporting that individual. What is the vision of VR providing transportation services? Again, we'll make available through our available. We will support transportation to the extent that it is available within any given community. If a person has access to public transportation and they're able to benefit in terms of that in order to be able to get to and from that work experience, then that's the way we support it. If they needed paratransit in order to be able to participate, we would support that piece of it. So it's really independent on what that person would need in order to be able to engage in that service. If there is no service available, then we would look to things like reimbursement of other individuals, possibly family members, in order to assist them get to that work experience. And we have a funding process specifically for those things. So when there are those issues, please make sure that they get brought to the attention of the counselor so that we can be sure that we are delivering those services where at all possible, and it's not because they're not able to get to or from a service that they're not able to participate. How many hours are required to complete OJT? Again, OJTs vary, but when you're looking at a work experience, you want it to be a sufficient length that the person is learning from that experience. So you're not talking about an OJT of a couple of days. You're talking about several weeks. Typically, OJT will run anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks, depending on how involved it is and the individual who's participating. Again, as part of that OJT reporting process, you'll be relating back the performance of the individual and how they're doing. And so some individuals may need a little bit less. Some might actually even need a little bit longer. But you would discuss those variances with the counselor, including the continuation of the OJT or completion of that OJT. For those of us working under the third-party cooperative arrangement, are we, excuse me, the writing here is very tiny. I just have to find where I was. For those of us working under the third-party cooperative arrangement, are we expected to provide job coaching, job services over the summer? If you are involved in a third-party cooperative or a third-party cooperative arrangement, again, OJTs could be available for individuals over the summer months. If you have questions regarding that piece of it, please feel free to contact me, and I'll be happy to discuss that with you. Yes, there will be documentation for completion of the webinar in case you need to deliver that for your employer as this being work time or any such. Unfortunately, these aren't, we're not able to provide continuing education credits or CRC for this session. Is there a required template for the survey associated with the training? Yes. And again, that is under the contract piece of it. So this, if you provided pre-placement training in the past, it will be exactly that same process for documentation that you followed. If you have not and need information on that, we'll be happy to assist you with reviewing what the required documentation would be. What is the motivator for the student to participate in this? Evidence has shown us that work experience and exposure work not only benefits the student, but allows them to be successful in other activities of a post-secondary nature, as well as to live independently. Those individuals who have the greatest success, by a large margin, are individuals who participated in work experiences and or paid work while they were in high school. Individuals who have benefits, for instance, we know systemically are the individuals who will have benefits, health insurance in particular, when they become employed. So having access, having awareness of what's involved in this work is a huge benefit for the individual. It also helps employers to better understand how they can engage and benefit from having, as employees, individuals with all kinds of abilities. And it's not just a situation where having them to do the job, because what happens is you have an employer who gets to see that there are benefits as far as community awareness and involvement. They all of a sudden have an individual who knows about their business and talks about their business out in the community. So the exposure for an employer is great. The benefit to the student is fantastic. The families, of course, may be in situations where they haven't really perceived that their child would be able to benefit in terms of having a career or even having a job. And so being able to provide that information to the individual, to the family, and to the people who are assisting with their education and planning for the future is a huge benefit. And again, we'll be looking to provide those services to individuals who are in high school and eligible for VR services. Will VR cover transportation costs for students in a program such as Project Search? No, we will not. The difference being for those work experiences, when you have Project Search, which is a transition program where their education is being conducted at a host business, the school has the responsibility for assuring transportation to and from that education site. So the school district has responsibility in those cases. So your Project Search, your third-party cooperative arrangements, where they're getting high school credit for those activities, the school district is responsible for transportation. Next question, is the school district considered to be a provider for pre-employment training? No. school district is a provider of the person's educational training. Now, some of the things that are covered in pre-placement training may very well be occurring within class. And that's why none of the activities that we're engaged in would be during those school hours are counting for that high school graduation credit. Okay, we've answered the other question. The contract is in approval right now. Question was, when will these services be available for contract? The contract has been revised and is being processed as we speak. Where do we go to receive a referral? The counselor. The counselors will be making referrals for these services for their youth that are in high school. Is it correct to say that PSE and trainings are covered through WIOA for transition age student with significant disabilities? And PSE, post-secondary education and training, covered through WIOA. WIOA doesn't cover post-secondary education. WIOA specifically speaks to services that are delivered for youth who are in high school when you're discussing VR, vocational rehabilitation, except for those supported employment youth who are mentioned. The services we've talked about today have been solely for those youth in high school that are being served by vocational rehabilitation. And we have mentioned that the provider rates are the same. And even though services should be actually easier to deliver to the youth population, we are maintaining that same benchmark payment. So even though we've made the process easier to access and to apply, we haven't reduced any of those benchmarks in order to reflect that ease of access that we've delivered. If we are doing job services under TPCA over this, okay. So if you have questions regarding the third-party cooperative arrangements, again, we did not discuss those. We specifically talked about the OJT and the pre-placement training available over the summer months. Please feel free to contact me directly, and we will discuss how those two would relate. Okay. See, we have some duplicate questions, which is all right. Can community-based work experience still be paid or unpaid? It can be paid or unpaid. However, VR will not provide wage reimbursement for the youth in high school while they're going through that OJT, that training. Hopefully that answers your question. Does an agency have to be an EN? Okay, we've answered that question. Again, they have to be a VR provider. We've talked about the benchmarks. So I apologize. There's some questions that are duplicates of those that I've already answered. The contract outlines the basic curriculum, but specific curriculum would be developed by the provider. We can certainly provide examples of curriculum if you have that need. Someone said, thanks for the information. You've answered my questions. Thank you. How can this program help high school students, and how should their teachers guide them? Again, the program would be for those activities outside of what's happening through their high school education. So exposure to those work experiences we know is highly beneficial and very much evidence-based in what it does deliver. Okay. Someone asked for the provider to be eligible for the OJ plan and final report writing. that you did say the provider has to pay the wage up front and then get reimbursed by VR. No. Again, those benchmarks are available for the services delivered. So if you provide an OJT, then you would receive those benchmarks upon delivery of the plan and report, as well, or plan and agreement rather, as well as the report for the OJT that's been delivered. And if you've provided an OJT in the past, it's very much the same process you followed in that previous delivery. We do not reimburse wages for individuals for the youth in high school who are participating in OJT. Are all transition students required to have a vocational evaluation? No. We do look at existing records and information. So if there's sufficient information there, we utilize that first and foremost. Of course, we key in on a person's aptitudes, and we see where individuals are likely to benefit in terms of career. Person's interests change all the time. For those of you who are still with us, I know your interest in this presentation is probably changing as I speak. However, those things that we do well, the core strengths and abilities, tend to remain the same. So if we can identify that and then key in on a person's interest within those strength areas, the person's far more likely to succeed in whatever endeavor they engage in, whether it's going in directly into placement or whether there's additional training or education that can be delivered to help them along that career path. Again, for those individuals who already have an employment services contract, you won't have to do anything to add. The new contract piece is being updated on our end. So if you are certified to provide employment services, that includes pre-placement training. If you are certified to provide supported employment services, it includes those benchmarks as well. You simply want to check and make sure you're certified to deliver those VR services in question. Okay, asked and answered. We will send out information regarding access to the presentation once it's been archived to all those who attended. Pre-placement training does not follow the same guidelines for referral that it does for the adult population. For youth in high school, the pre-placement training can be made separate from the referral for employment services. So it is a standalone service that can be delivered to those youth in high school. You do not have to make a referral for placement services at the same time as the pre-placement training, as was previously the case. Again, with documentation, there's required report and survey that's available. If you have a question regarding examples, anything of that nature, feel free to get in touch with us. We'll be happy to provide you with some information. One person asked, what is the age range? These are for youth who are in high school, so under the age of 21, or rather under the age of 22, so long as they're still attending high school. They're still receiving services under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or otherwise participating in that secondary education. If you have an existing referral for a youth for pre-placement training where it was 40 hours, what you'll do is simply contact your local VR office and they will get you set for the 20 hours. And again, it's the same fee code, so you actually don't have to do that, but your documentation that the person has completed 20 hours of training will allow you then to receive payment under that new code once the contract has been approved. You all should receive notice once that has occurred, and then thereafter, if you have questions regarding an individual account, feel free to follow back up with us. And it seems like we're now getting to a point where we've answered the majority of the questions. VR counseling staff received training regarding upcoming changes under WIOA earlier. The coding changes will roll out and training for VR staff at the same time as the coding is made available to them. If a provider is delivering services that meet pre-placement training requirements, then they can be reimbursed. However, they need to have that referral and authorization in place before they deliver those services. So I want to ask a question about project search sites. Next year we will be able to fund an additional OJT rotation. So the second rotation is one that will be funded for that as well. And I know that is broader than the topic that we had focused in on today. Again, wage reimbursement is not required under the OJT to youth as it is with the adult population. So if the provider or the employer do not provide wages as part of that process, it would be considered an unpaid work experience or OJT. Can pre-employment services be prorated, or is it all or nothing? To answer that question, the 20 hours is the prorated piece of it, so it can be prorated for delivery of the 20 hours, and then an additional 20 hours can be made available if necessary. How to become a provider, again, rehabworks.org. If you go to our home site and look on the left-hand side, you'll see an entire section regarding becoming a VR vendor. If you have any difficulties with putting together your program or accessing services, feel free to contact us. We'll be happy to put you in or to connect you with the local VR staff. Will be able to assist you. Okay. If we feel the customer will benefit from the additional 20 hours, do we let counselors know prior to the class starting, or do we need to complete the first 20 hours before requesting the extension? You can certainly let the counselor know prior to that piece. Again, they will close out the 20 hours and process your payment for completion of that before authorizing the second portion. But you want to make sure that the two are occurring as the process, and that you do have a referral and approval for that additional 20 hours before you engage in those services. So earlier is better. A lot of good questions, you all. I'm glad that you'll have such a fine interest, and I see that many of you are still with us, so we appreciate that. With the exiting seniors, will we still be able to do these services since they should be done in high school, or will we start with juniors? You'll be starting with juniors. Once the person has actually exited high school and they're not continuing on with their education under IDEA as allowable until age 21 for those that qualify, at that point they would not be accessing these services, but rather the adult services that we have not talked about today. OJT can be paid or unpaid with the same benchmarks for youth in high school. Okay, and again, we're getting some of the same questions, so bear with me as I read through them and don't subject you to the same answers too many more times. Okay, one question asked regarding the guidance and counseling being provided by VR staff. There is a mechanism that we could count those services under WIOA. However, in order to do that, we would have to track the counselor's time. And at this point, we feel like the services that we can deliver to you through pre-placement training and work experience should allow us to meet the WIOA requirement without putting any additional demand on our staff for activities that they engage in and cause them to have an additional demand for tracking and accounting for their time in providing guidance and counseling. And again, in documentation, you would document that within your case notes. VR does have enough youth in high school on their caseloads to be able to meet the WIOA requirement. Again, the importance will be in having sufficient support through our provider base, which many of you are a part of, in order to be able to deliver those services. Again, without the providers, we would have to look at other mechanisms to be able to assure that we meet the WIOA requirement, which could then impact other service delivery, and we certainly want to avoid that. High schools are not expected to request these services. Again, schools follow their same process in identifying when to invite the VR program for individuals as they would through their regular individual education plan process. If you'd like to discuss that further, please feel free to contact me either using my direct line or by email. If the provider is also a transportation provider, can they arrange for transportation for the students? Again, if you're looking for reimbursement for transportation, something that they could not otherwise get to and from that work experience, please make sure that the counselor is aware, because that service would have to be added to their plan in order for that to be reimbursed. It would not be reimbursed after the fact, should it be delivered as part of a process. Those who participate today will receive a certificate of attendance. Okay. One of the questions, can a school system become a vendor for pre-employment placement and OJT during the summer months for a summer program experience? The school itself, if it was part of that educational support, would not be able to, although staff who work in the school system during the months that they're not engaged could become VR providers and deliver same or similar services as a provider sans service through the school system. So without doing it as part of their school process and without that counting towards high school graduation requirements or receiving credit for that or using school funds for that. We're down to the last 4 questions. Is it suggested that students stay in high school until they age out to gain as much employment training as they can before the age of 22 and before they begin working with VR? No, we haven't seen a benefit to individuals staying in the system as long as possible, except to become dependent upon the supports there. And to the extent that a person can effectively begin making that transition out of the school system and secure that career pathway that will best benefit them, that is typically the best course. So as you're developing those supports and doing that, you have to make that on a case-by-case basis, and it's a very much an individualized decision. But as individuals are able to do that, they typically benefit much more from the transition to work and community engagement than they would continuing to go through the school system, where VR is not able to provide support for the majority of the year to a system where they're actually engaged in those things that they'll be doing in preparing for the rest of their life and securing their own independence. Okay, it actually looks like the last ones. Oh, wait, one last question. Several of you thank me, and thank you all for attending. Can students who just graduated from high school and are still in the summer after high school utilize this? And unfortunately, no. Once they've exited the school system, the VR transition services would not be available to them. However, other VR services and support certainly would, including things like post-secondary education, training, and placement services, where we have spent most of our funding on youth in the past. These additional services available to youth who are still in high school are to supplement those services that we have been traditionally providing, so that people do have an easier transition. Well, thank you all. Again, we know your time is valuable, and we appreciate the participation. You all have a good afternoon, and if you do have additional questions, please feel free to contact me directly or by email. Thank you all.